Okay, so have you ever ordered takeout online and felt like you're basically handing over your entire life story just for a burger and fries?
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Right, like it makes you wonder, where does all that data go? And that's where GDPR comes in.
It sounds a little dry, GDPR.
I know. It doesn't exactly scream exciting podcast episode, but trust me on this, all right?
Okay.
This is about taking back control of all that data, all those digital breadcrumbs you're leaving everywhere online.
And what's interesting about GDPR is it's not about locking everything down. Like, it's not about making the internet this, like, digital fortress, right?
Right.
It's really about giving you, the individual, more of a say in how companies use your information.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, we get it, data is valuable, companies want to use it, but like, at what cost? Right. So to help us kind of decode all of this, we're diving into C.R. Hivarankovic's GDPR-aware handbook.
Great book.
Yeah, and he breaks it down in a way that even I can understand, and that's saying something.
Yeah, he does a really good job of making it very accessible.
He does.
So let's jump right in. What exactly is personal data under GDPR? Seems like almost anything digital could identify someone these days.
Yeah, it's surprisingly broad. The handbook, it breaks it down piece by piece, but basically, any information that can directly or indirectly identify a living person, that's personal data.
Okay, so the obvious stuff, name, address, that's a given. What about my online footprint? Like my username, my IP address, are those under GDPR's watch too?
Oh, absolutely. The handbook uses the term identifier to cover any piece of information that can distinguish an individual. They even point out that in certain contexts, like, say, our GDPR training session example, your Zoom name and profile picture could be identifiers.
So even within that specific online meeting, those details are part of my personal data.
Exactly.
It really makes you think twice about what you share online, even in spaces that feel private.
Right. It's all about context. And here's where it gets even more interesting. It doesn't even need to be as specific as your full name or home address. Let's say someone has your age, profession, and they know you live in a small town.
Okay.
If it's reasonably possible to identify you from that combined information, GDPR considers it personal data.
Wow, that's a bit unnerving, honestly. It really highlights how much data we generate without even realizing it. No wonder companies are scrambling to keep up with GDPR.
And here's the kicker. GDPR applies to any company doing business related to the EU, even if they're not physically located there.
Seriously, a company in, say, I don't know, South America could still need to be GDPR compliant.
Yep, potentially. The handbook has this great flowchart, lays out GDPR's territorial scope step by step. It hinges on whether a company is targeting the EU market, even just one country within the EU.
Right. The flowchart uses the example of a Ukrainian online education platform. Since they offer courses globally, including to EU residents, they need to be GDPR compliant. But a flower shop in Minsk, only delivering locally, they're off the hook if a Polish customer places an order, as long as they're not specifically targeting the EU market.
You got it. It all comes down to targeting the EU mark. And they even consider things like offering EU language options or using a .eu domain name as signs of targeting.
Wow. Makes you realize how global this all really is. But let's get real. What happens if a company isn't following the GDPR rules? What are the consequences?
Well, GDPR has teeth. We could be talking massive fines, millions of euros for companies that don't comply.
Okay, that got my attention. But it sounds like it's not just a stick, right? It's about encouraging companies to be responsible with our data.
Okay, so, all right, so let's say, a company's listening to this and they're like, okay, you know what? GDPR does apply to us.
Right.
What now? Like, what does that actually mean in terms of like the, day-to-day? How do they actually comply? And, full disclosure, GDPR does have a little bit of a reputation for being, kind of intense.
It's true. It's with all the rules and everything.
It can definitely feel that way. But that's kind of the point, I think, It's about putting those protections in place, those meaningful protections.
It's about shifting that balance of power back toward the individual. And at the very core of GDPR, there are 6 fundamental principles that underpin everything else. And once you actually understand those, then all the, the nitty-gritty details about the rules, they start to make a lot more sense.
Okay, so walk us through them. What are the 6 principles?
All right, so principle number 1, it's all about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency.
All right.
You can't just, scoop up someone's data and do whatever you want with it.
Right.
There has to be a clear legal basis for you to even process it in the first place.
Okay.
Whether that is, consent, a contract, a legal obligation, whatever it is, it has to be legit. And you absolutely must be transparent and upfront with people about what you're doing with their data.
So, like, my favorite local bookstore, if they keep track of, like, what kind of books I like, because I'm a regular, and, they recommend me books based on that, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if they then took that information and sold it to, like, a marketing company without telling me,
Right.
big no-no.
Not okay.
Okay.
And that's the fairness piece of it as well. It's like, it should be a two-way street, built on trust.
Transparency.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. What about principle number 2?
So principle number 2 is purpose limitation.
Okay.
And this one is, I think, fairly straightforward. Basically, you can only use personal data for the specific purpose that you initially collected it for.
Okay.
So, example, I give you my email address because I want to download a free ebook from your website. You can't then sign me up for your weekly newsletter without my, express permission.
It's like when you're at a party and someone asks for your number and then adds you to, like, 50 group texts.
Right, exactly.
Without asking. Not cool.
Not cool. Very annoying. And then principles 3, 4, and 5, they all kind of work together. They're data minimization, accuracy, and storage limitation.
Okay.
Basically, what it boils down to is this. Only collect the data you absolutely need for what you're doing. Don't just collect everything just in case. Make sure it's accurate, it's up to date, and as soon as you're done with it, you get rid of it. Delete it securely.
Wait, so no more, like, data hoarding? Like, no more of these massive piles of data?
Well, in theory, that's the idea. And it's interesting because when you really think about that, you realize how important it is. Because imagine you have, let's say, a plastic surgery clinic, right?
Okay.
They're dealing with, like, really, really sensitive data.
Right.
Photos, potentially.
Yeah.
All sorts of things. And let's say their systems aren't secure, they haven't been following these principles, their database gets hacked.
Oh, no.
Suddenly, all of that incredibly personal information is out in the open.
Well.
And the damage to those individuals, but also to the clinic,
Right.
it could be huge.
Okay, yeah. That's a powerful example.
Yeah. And finally, principle number 6, we have accountability. And this one is a biggie because it's not enough to just say, we're following all the rules. You've got to be able to prove it. You have to actually demonstrate that you're doing what you say you're doing. And that means documenting your data processing activities, being upfront about any data breaches, if those happen, hopefully they don't, and basically demonstrating that data protection is baked into everything you do as a company. It's not just an afterthought. It's not something you do, at the end.
Right.
It's core to how you operate.
So GDPR is basically telling companies, put your money where your mouth is.
Yes, exactly.
Don't just, like, talk the talk, actually do it.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm into that.
Right.
But I think it's really easy to get caught up in what companies have to do, right?
Yeah.
What about me? Like, what about my rights as an individual? If a company's is, like, not playing by the rules, what can I actually do about it? And that's what I really want to dig into, right? Because it's not just about companies checking boxes and jumping through hoops.
Right.
GDPR actually gives me, the individual, some power, too.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me more about that. Like, what actual rights do I have?
Okay, so basically, under GDPR, you have this whole set of rights that really let you take the wheel, in a way, when it comes to your data.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah, you're not just along for the ride.
Right.
So for starters, you have the right to information and access. And basically what this means is you can go to any company, any organization, and you can say, hey, what data do you have about me? What are you doing with it?
So no more of those, like, super long, jargon-filled privacy policies that nobody understands.
Ideally not, no. The idea is they have to give you that information in a way that is actually understandable, so you actually know what's going on.
Right.
And if you find something that's wrong, let's say, I don't know, they've got your birth date wrong, or they're using your data for something you never agreed to, you have the right to rectification, and you have the right to restrict processing.
So I can tell them to fix it, or
Yeah,
even, like, hit pause on how they're using my data while I try to figure things out?
Exactly. You got it. And here's the really big one, I think. In certain situations, you also have the right to erasure. This one's also known as the right to be forgotten.
Wait, for real? Like a digital clean slate? Is that a thing?
Well, it's not a magic wand that just wipes out your entire existence online.
Okay, right.
But let's say you signed up for, I don't know, a bunch of services when you were younger. Maybe you shared some information you now regret. Under GDPR, you have a much stronger basis to request those companies to delete that data.
Wow.
And it gives you a chance to sort of like start over, at least digitally, right?
That's amazing. Okay, but what about those situations where a company is using my data for something that I find downright creepy? Like, I don't know, let's say an AI that's judging job applicants based on their facial expressions during an interview.
Okay, yeah.
Can I do anything about that? Because that just feels wrong.
You absolutely can. That's where the right to object comes in. So you can object to any processing of your data that you find unfair, unethical,
Right.
just plain wrong, especially when it comes to things like automated decision making, like
Yeah.
your example, right? You have the right to demand a human review that decision or to challenge any decision that was made solely by an algorithm that you feel might have been biased or inaccurate.
So it's not just about whether a company's technically following the rules, it's about whether what they're doing with my data actually
Yeah.
aligns with my values,
Right.
like what I consider to be fair.
You got it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And if you ever feel like a company's not really living up to all of this, remember that principle of accountability we talked about?
Yeah.
You have the right to actually complain to a data protection authority.
Okay.
And these authorities, they have some teeth, They can investigate companies. They can issue some pretty hefty fines to those who aren't complying with GDPR.
Hold on. So there are actual people whose job it is to fight for my data rights?
Essentially, yeah.
That almost makes me want to send them a thank you card or something.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big win for individuals. And in some cases, if you can demonstrate that a company's GDPR violation caused you actual harm, like financial harm, reputational harm, emotional distress, you might even be entitled to compensation.
Wow. You're telling me GDPR is not just some abstract set of rules. It actually gives me real tangible ways to fight back against companies that are mishandling my data.
That's the whole point.
I have to say, I started this conversation thinking GDPR, kind of boring, but now I'm like, GDPR is my new best friend.
That's great. I love to hear that. I think that's the power of understanding your rights,
Sure, totally.
Because you realize you actually have a say in all of this.
Okay.
But I think one of the biggest takeaways here, and I think this is something that Vrankovich really drives home in his handbook,
Yeah.
it's that GDPR isn't just about compliance, right?
Right.
It's about fundamentally shifting the way we think about data,
Right.
the way we value data. If companies are now being forced to be way more mindful about what data they collect, why they collect it, how long they keep it for,
Yeah.
maybe, just maybe, we can start moving toward a less data-hungry internet, you know?
It really makes you wonder what a world where data privacy is the norm, not the exception, would actually look like.
Right.
Well, I don't know about you, but my brain is officially full,
As are mine.
but in a good way.
And good way, yeah.
This was fascinating. Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone listening, we hope you learned a thing or two as well.
Yes.
And remember, you have more power than you think when it comes to your data.